Now that we've talked about how to treat the water chemically, to kill the algae and bacteria and other contaminants that may be in the water, the next thing that we have to talk about is filtration. How do we remove those contaminants from the water? There are two basic types of filters, sand filters and element filters. First, we're going to talk about sand filters. This is a sand filter. Actually, this is a cutaway of a sand filter. The way a sand filter works is water comes out of the skimmer on the side of the pool, comes into the pump. The pump pumps water up into the valve head and down into the filter tank. To help you visualize that, this valve head here is spraying the water out over the sand. Now, the sand is only filled up about halfway, so that the water can spray over the surface of the sand. So the water sprays over the surface of the sand, and then the water runs through the sand and is collected by the little fingers down at the bottom of the system. Well, those fingers collect the water, but they don't let any dirt through. So now what's happening is the water comes through the valve head, through the sand. The sand captures the dirt. Then the water is pumped back through this standpipe, back up through the valve head, and then back into the pool. It's a very, very simple system. Because it's so simple, a lot of people get confused and it can cause some problems. Let me explain why. The way a sand filter works, when it's in the filter position, water is coming down into the sand. Well, the sand traps the dirt on the surface. The top 1, 2, or even 3 inches of dirt is where all the dirt is trapped. Well, as that dirt gets trapped up here, it starts to cake. Well, what that does is it starts to pack the sand together. It's getting really dirty and nasty and it gets caked. Well, as it's doing that, the pump is still pumping like crazy. It doesn't realize that the water isn't going through the filter very well. And so what happens is that dirt gets caked in the sand gets packed tighter and tighter and tighter, and pressure builds up. There's a little pressure gauge up on top that says there's more pressure building up on top of the sand. Well, most people think, well, if the pressure gets up, my filter is dirty, then it's time to backwash. Let me explain what backwashing is. Backwashing is you move the valve head from the filter position to the backwash position. And what happens is now, instead of the water flowing from the top and through the sand, the water is gurgling up from underneath. It's coming through those lateral assemblies and it's coming up through the sand. Well, that stirs the sand around and it cleans it. And then the dirty water comes out the side port over here. On this filter, it's coming out the back. And what's happening now is dirty water is being pumped out. With your kit, you will get a backwash hose to direct that water. Now, I always recommend that you direct that dirty water to your neighbor's yard. I'm just teasing. But really, it is dirty water. And you can see that dirty water is coming out of there. So it's stirring the sand up and it's flushing all of the dirt out and it's pumping it out. Well, after you've done that for usually about 2 or 2.5 minutes, unplug the filter system, unplug it, and now you can move the valve head. Well, first of all, you want to move it back to what's called the rinse position. What happens in the rinse position is the water comes down through the valve head, through the sand, but it still goes out through the backwash port. What that means is water is going through the sand and it's seeding the sand back down. Remember, during backwash it's stirred up. It's seeding that sand back down so it's ready to start filtering again, but it's not pumping the water back to the pool. The reason that's important is if you went straight from backwash to filter, the water would go down from the valve head, but it would run right through the sand because the sand would be loose, not packed. And dirty water would go into your pool for about 15 or 20 seconds. So normally you run the filter on the filter position, that's filtering the water. When the filter gets dirty, up here, the pressure is building up, time to backwash. Well, then you move it to the backwash position for about 2 minutes. After you've backwashed for 2 or 2.5 minutes, move it to the rinse position and that reseats the sand. Again, then move it back to the filter position. One thing I always like to remind people, always unplug the pump before changing filter positions. It's sort of like putting in the clutch before shifting gears. You don't want to just spin that with the pump running in full gear so that you don't hurt any of the O-rings inside of the valve head. Okay, so filter, dirty water is building up on the top, dirt is building up on the top of the sand, backwash stirs it up, rinse reseats the sand. So what's the inherent problem? Well, the inherent problem is people generally backwash too often. They see that gauge says, well, it's up 8, 10 pounds pressure, but my filter must be getting dirty. I must clean, it's time to clean my filter. Well, maybe or maybe not. So the problem is sand filters filter better when they're dirty. They don't filter as well when they're clean. Let me explain why. After you've backwashed and you've seeded the sand and you move it back to the filter position, you plug the pump back in and that pump is running like crazy and water is coming back through the filter. There's water coming back into the return like the rooster tail behind a jet ski. It's just pumping water like crazy. And people think, oh, that's great, it's really circulating water. Well, that's what it looks like. It's circulating a lot of water. But what it means if it's circulating that much water is that it's not filtering. The water is running through the sand with hardly any resistance. What happens is as the filter gets dirty and it packs the sand tighter and tighter, it starts to filter finer and finer particles. Sand filters, right after backwashing, may only be filtering at about 18 to 20 microns. After the filter gets dirty, it can get down as low as 8, 10, or even 12 microns of how small a particle it's picking up. So sand filters filter best when they're dirty. I get the call all the time, and they'll say, Mike, my filter's broke. And I say, oh, okay, well, what's the matter with it? And they say, well, it's not keeping the water good and clean. And I say, well, is it pumping water? Yes. Okay, does it have sand in the filter? Yes. Is it leaking anywhere? No. So it's pumping water, it's going through the sand, and it's going back into the pool. Well, your filter's fine. It's doing everything it's supposed to do. And then I'll ask a trick question. Are you backwashing the filter all the time to keep it good and clean, keep your sand good and clean? And invariably they'll say, yes, I've been backwashing almost every day. Well, that's the problem. Sand filters only filter effectively when they're dirty. Only backwash the pool, and I tell people, the gauge comes from the manufacturer and that's wonderful, but my recommendation is ignore the gauge. Only backwash your filter when the water coming back into the pool has slowed down to a trickle. Well, now you're not processing enough water. When that water slows down to a trickle, you're not processing enough water. It's time to backwash. Not before. If you backwash too often, your water will gradually get cloudy and you won't understand and you'll start adding a lot of chemicals, and really it's just because you're backwashing your sand filter too often. Sand filters filter better when they're dirty.
Where family and fun come together.